With the Orioles continuing to be more and more inactive throughout this offseason, it's becoming more clear that the O's are kind of putting all their eggs in the prospect basket. And while I don't fully agree with that strategy, at the very least, it's a team doing it that may have the number one system in baseball because they've got a lot of top-end talent, led once again at number one by Jackson Holliday. We'll talk about some new prospect lists, a couple of Orioles pitchers signing elsewhere, and a finalized coaching staff for the O's coming up on this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast.
You are Locked On Orioles, your daily Baltimore Orioles podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey there, Orioles fans. Today is Friday, January 19th, 2024, and welcome back into the Locked On Orioles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, I'm your host, Connor Newcomb. And coming up on today's episode, we are getting to a few topics with some Orioles news and notes to finish out the week. We'll talk about Austin Voth and Joey Krehbiel, who were both with the O's last year, have both signed with the Mariners this offseason. Why are the M's going after these guys, and should the Orioles have brought them back? Then we'll talk about the prospect list at Baseball America and Baseball Prospectus. They both came out earlier this week. Both, unsurprisingly, have Jackson Holliday at number one, but who are the other Orioles prospects who are rising up the lists? We'll talk about those guys. And then finally, early in the week, the Orioles finalized their major league coaching staff for the 2024 season. There weren't a lot of things we were waiting for, but the one thing we did get is who is the Orioles' new assistant pitching coach? We'll get to all that and more coming up on this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast, which is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. So we're going to start today with a couple of former Orioles who ended up signing elsewhere so far this offseason. And for the O's, we know they have not exactly, let's say, added a whole lot of talent this offseason. Their one major league move was signing Craig Kimbrell to a one-year, $13 million deal. And I think we all know that the Orioles need pitching. And I said it on Twitter on Wednesday, but definitely go and check out the episode of Baseball Barbacast with Jake and Jordan from Cespedes Family Barbecue. And they also had Mike Farron on from MLB Network Radio, who does a great job covering prospects. They did a whole segment about the Orioles and about, should they be planning to trade away prospects to get a top-line starting pitcher this offseason? And I thought, and a lot of national baseball podcasts and shows and articles have written and talked about this exact thing throughout the offseason and asking, what are the Orioles doing? I thought that among national perspectives, this was by far the most fair one, the most well thought out and researched one, and the most nuanced conversation I have heard. Now, it helps that all three of those guys know what they're talking about. Jake Mintz is also an Orioles fan, so he's a little more tuned in as well, but really good conversation there to go and check out. But the O's, not only are they not bringing in a lot of pitching, they've also let a couple of their arms walk. Now, listen. These are not guys who played a big role in the Orioles last year. These are not guys who were even on the Orioles 2023 playoff roster. But Austin Voth and Joey Krehbiel were free agents this offseason, and neither re-signed with the Orioles. Let's start with Austin Voth, who, somewhat surprisingly, ended up getting a major league deal this offseason. Voth signing a one-year, $1.25 million MLB contract with the Seattle Mariners earlier this week. Now, Voth, a 31-year-old righty who, if you remember, the Orioles claimed off waivers from the Nationals back in June of 2022. They kind of claimed Voth right before the O's got things going. If you remember the 10-game winning streak the Orioles had in late June and early July of 2022, the claim of Voth was in early June. So they were starting to play a little bit better baseball, but they still weren't looking like anything like a winning record team until they brought in Austin Voth. And listen, he had a long career with the Nationals so far. He had always had good stuff. He'd had some success in D.C., but also just couldn't put it all together. And he was pitching out of the Nats bullpen, and he had a 10.13 ERA out of the Nats pen when they DFA'd him and put him on waivers. And the Orioles scooped him up, and everyone said, what are the O's doing? They're taking a pitcher who has a 10 ERA with the Nationals. What is going on here? Well, if you listen to my episode after the claim, I told you what was going on there. The Orioles saw this good stuff. They saw the Nationals' lack of a pitching development program, especially at the major league level, and they saw what Austin Voth could do if you honed in his stuff. And they basically said, hey, we're going to increase your curveball usage. That is by far your best pitch. That is an elite curveball. You're going to throw it more and more. We're also going to help you add a sweeper because your current slider cutter combo not working out. We're going to have you throw more fastballs up in the zone, and we're going to kind of eliminate your sinker. They did that, and all of a sudden, Austin Voth was a huge reason the Orioles ended 2022 with a winning record and were in the playoff race in September. He made 17 starts, 22 appearances overall with the Orioles in 2022, and in 83 innings. It's hard to kind of remember this, but Austin Voth had a 3.04 ERA in 83 innings with the Orioles in 2022. Wasn't walking a lot of guys, solid strikeout rates. The stuff was looking good, was throwing way more strikes, giving up less long balls, less extra base hits. He looked like he was fixed. And then he tailed off a little bit at the end of the season, and he came into spring training with most of us thinking, yeah, Austin Voth is going to get a spot on the opening day roster in 2023. And he was one of the 12 pitchers that the Orioles came into camp with saying, these are our 12 starting options. We got to get this down to 5. Voth was one of them. But there was always the thought of, okay, the Orioles have more starters now. Voth has been a reliever at the big league level in the past. I don't know if they can sustain that level of success. He was never throwing more than 5 innings in those starts he was making with the O's in 2022. So I think a lot of people thought he's probably going to the bullpen. And that's what happened. He made the team out of spring trading, but as a reliever. And I don't think the Orioles were quite sure what role they wanted to use him in. It was a long man. It was a fireman. He did have some 1-inning outings, but it generally did not go well for Austin Voth. And overall, as a relief pitcher for the O's in 2023, he made 25 appearances, pitching 34 2/3 innings, and had a 5.19 ERA. Yeah, a little higher than the 3.04 ERA he had the previous year. His strikeout rate was the same. His walks went up a little bit, but really the issue was he was giving up much more hard contact this year than he was last year. More doubles, more homers, and just more runs. And when you add in a few more walks, that's going to inflate your ERA. And it did kind of seem like every time he was coming into the game early this season, he gave up a homer. That's just what it felt like for Austin Voth. Now, he eventually went on the injured list in June, on June 14th, and the Orioles called it elbow discomfort. And then it came out that Voth was actually dealing with that discomfort all the way back in spring training in March, but he kind of pitched through it. It was feeling better. They put him on the roster, and the O's talked about how it had just come up very briefly at different times throughout the first 2 months of the season, and finally it got so bad that they put him on the injured list. And I get that he was not good, and the Orioles probably shouldn't have kept sending him out there, but you have to contribute some of the failures to a pitcher having elbow discomfort and trying to pitch through it. That was clearly what was happening. So the O's finally activated him off the injured list and brought him back up to the bigs on August 23rd. But when they did it, you could tell it was, hey, we just need a fresh arm this week, and then we're probably done with Austin Voth. And a lot of people freaked out when they added him to the roster then. And I said, this is going to be short term. And it was. 10 days later, the Orioles DFA'd Austin Voth kind of for good. And at that point, he was coming off injury. He wasn't pitching well. And so he was not claimed on waivers. And actually, the Orioles were able to send him down to AAA Norfolk. And that's where he stayed for the rest of the year. He pitched out September in AAA, helped the Norfolk Tides win the AAA championship. And he was sticking around, maybe hoping the Orioles would call him back up. And they did need some arms, but Austin Voth was never the arm that they needed. Now, the curveball's still good, and the fastball still has solid velocity, and he's got that sweeper. But I just think for Austin Voth, he still has a future in the big leagues, right? He signed a major league deal with a Mariners team that it's not like they're short on pitching. Like, the Mariners need bats, but their bullpen, their rotation is pretty good. So to give Austin Voth a major league deal is pretty surprising and tells me they think he's going to be, at the very least, a part of their big league bullpen in 2024. Like, at 31 years old, I think he still has something left in the tank. But with the way he pitched and with the injury this year and with more and more pitchers coming along in that Orioles bullpen, I just felt like it was probably time for the two teams, the team and the player, to go their separate ways, that his time with the O's had run its course. But I feel like for Austin Voth, like, that was a success story, right? For the Orioles player development, especially at the big league level. They identified a player on waivers that they brought in. They couldn't send him to the minors. He was in the big leagues. And although it was brief, they made him better. And he gave the Orioles an outstanding 83 innings down the stretch in 2022. And he still did, despite the bad numbers, have some good outings in 2023 before the injury. So it's a waiver claim. He gave up nothing. And they got something good out of him, and I think it proved that the Orioles can do something with pitchers at the major league level as well. But the Mariners were not done signing former Orioles pitchers, because then just a day later, they go out and they get Joey Krehbiel on a minor league deal. Now, again, Krehbiel doesn't have the guarantee. He will get an invite to big league spring training with the Mariners, but much less of a path to the opening day roster. But they said, we're getting Austin Voth, might as well get Joey Krehbiel as a package deal. Krehbiel, also a 31-year-old right-hander. O's claimed him off waivers from the Rays back in September of 2021. And remember, Krehbiel spent basically the entire 2022 season in the Orioles bullpen, had a 3.90 ERA in 57 2/3 innings, didn't walk a lot of guys, didn't strike him out either, was really a big-time ground ball pitcher. But Krehbiel was a guy it was by far his first full big league season, and like many of the Orioles relievers, he just crashed and burned at the end of the year, struggled in August, struggled in September, was actually sent down to AAA with about 2 weeks left in that 2022 season. And it didn't get much better for him. He did not make the Orioles out of spring training, wasn't on the opening day roster. Started the year in AAA, and then was DFA'd off the 40-man roster in May to make room for Luis Torrens, a catcher the Orioles picked up on waivers who they didn't even end up playing. He was on the active roster for a little bit, but didn't even end up playing in a major league game before they DFA'd him too. So that kind of told you what they thought about Joey Krehbiel at that point. Now, he did clear waivers, and he stayed in the organization at AAA Norfolk, and he just had a wild year at AAA. He threw 39 innings, had a 3.89 ERA. Okay, that's all right. 18% strikeout rate. That's low, but that's normal for Krehbiel. Except he had a 14% walk rate, which is like almost double the league average. And yet he somehow had an ERA under 4. It was an outstanding year of batted ball luck. And he did come to the big leagues a little bit this year with the Orioles. Had 3 different brief stints in the big leagues with the O's, one briefly in July, one in August, and one in September. And in his 6 appearances, he threw 5 innings, 1 run on 2 hits, 5 Ks, 2 walks, and a homer. Like, it was 6 appearances, but he did what the O's needed him to do, kind of in emergency roles, joining the bullpen. But at this point, with Krehbiel struggling so much with the walks and spending most of this year in AAA, he, along with Voth, elected free agency at the end of the year. And same with Voth, I could have seen the Orioles bringing Krehbiel back on a minor league deal. I don't think they were ever giving either of these guys a major league deal, but I could have seen him trying to bring him back on a minor league deal and give him a chance to make the team. But at this point, he's really no more than a depth arm at AAA, and the O's have a lot of those guys. They're looking for more guys that are going to step up and be definite pieces, at least in the big league bullpen or the rotation. Now, Joey Krehbiel's certainly a good vibes guy and seems to be like that clubhouse funny guy that a lot of the players like, so I'm sure they will miss having Krehbiel in the organization, but good luck to him. Good luck to Austin Voth. I just feel like for both of these guys, and it is funny they both ended up in Seattle, but for both of these guys, it had just kind of run its course in their time with the Orioles. But on the flip side of, older veterans who are moving on, the O's have a lot of young guys to replace them, and that became even more evident this week as a couple of the most prominent top 100 prospect lists were released, one at Baseball America and one at Baseball Prospectus. And it's no secret, Jackson Holliday, in both places, was ranked the number 1 prospect in baseball once again. But he wasn't the only guy on either of those lists. There were a lot of Orioles names that are moving up these charts, and we'll get to those guys and what they could do for the O's this season coming up next. But first, this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast is brought to you by Gametime. You shouldn't have to worry when you buy tickets to your next big event. Just go to Gametime. It is the fast and easy way to buy tickets for all the sports, music, comedy, and theater events near you. With killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their best price guarantee, Gametime takes the guesswork out of buying tickets. I've used Gametime many times to buy tickets to Orioles games at Oriole Park at Camden Yards, and I've got them at the last minute. I am not kidding you. I have been standing outside of Utah Street, right by the stadium, have gone on my phone, have bought a ticket through Gametime, and the best part is you can see where your seat is, you can see the view, and they send it right to the app. You get the ticket right there. You don't have to wait for the email to load, might not have good internet, you don't have to wait for a text message, for a link to sign in and get the ticket. No. You buy it on the app, the ticket's on the app, you show it at the gate, you scan it, and I walk right into Oriole Park. Gametime is great. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDON. That's LOCKEDON for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. So as we continue on an Orioles news and notes episode here, wanted to talk prospects a little bit here because a couple of the big prospect lists came out this week. Both Baseball America and Baseball Prospectus, two of the top places out there covering all things prospects, released their top 100 lists this week. Now, if you listen to or watch this podcast, you know, which I've talked about, my go-to place is FanGraphs. It's probably my number one go-to place. And then also I use Prospects Live for a lot of things as well. But I do find Baseball America and Baseball Prospectus really, really good resources as well. And I do enjoy these lists. So let's start with Baseball America because the Orioles made some history with this Baseball America list, which is considered here in January their preseason list. Jackson Holliday, as he's been for a little while now, and unsurprisingly, was ranked once again as the number one prospect in baseball. And as we know, Jackson Holliday, he might not be on the opening day roster, and I'm actually predicting he won't be on the O's opening day roster. But at some point this year, before the All-Star break, Jackson Holliday should be, and I think will be, in the major leagues, playing almost every day for the Orioles, probably mostly playing second base for the O's, and showing how good he can be and why the O's took him number one in the draft just a couple years ago. But Jackson Holliday made history because for the third straight Baseball America preseason list, the Orioles had the number one prospect. In 2022, it was Adley Rutschman. In 2023, it was Gunnar Henderson. And in 2024, it's Jackson Holliday. And the Orioles became the first team ever, since Baseball America has been putting out these lists for, I think, 30 plus years at this point, first team ever to have a number one prospect in 3 consecutive preseason lists. That is the sustained success of this Orioles system. But here's the thing, like that's amazing right there. But it's also the depth. Now, the Orioles didn't show up with 7, 8, 9 guys on the top 100s like they have sometimes in the past few years, but that's okay. Some of these guys are already in the big leagues, right? Jordan Westberg, Grayson Rodriguez, Gunnar Henderson, Adley Rutschman. These guys have graduated. They're no longer prospects. They are in the big leagues. But there's still some guys to backfill. And I think the biggest just win for the O's system on this list, even bigger than Jackson Holliday being number one, because we all knew that was going to happen, was Samuel Basallo being a top 10 prospect in baseball. Baseball America ranking Basallo number 10 on their national prospect list. Obviously the number 2 guy in the Orioles system. And Basallo, who's going to be 20 years old, got to Double-A at the end of last season, probably doesn't get to the bigs this year, but you would think in 2025 he's an Oriole. He's a catcher. The defense isn't pristine, but it's good enough. He can play some first base, and he hits the ball insanely hard, insanely far. He's an incredibly advanced hitter for his age from the left side. He's an exciting prospect. And to see him jump up as an Orioles international signing for $1.3 million in 2021, to see him get to this point as the number 10 prospect in baseball, is going to start the year in Double-A Bowie, is insane. It's honestly incredible, the rise that Samuel Basallo has made, like the first huge success story out of the Orioles system. And here's the thing about Basallo. Now that he's number 10, he's still going to be prospect eligible this time next year. Even if he were to potentially get a cup of coffee at the end of the year in the big leagues, which could happen, it won't be enough to take him off prospect list. So if you think about it, if he's already at number 10, he could be number 1 this time next year. Like, there is a solid chance that Samuel Basallo makes it 4 straight Orioles as the number 1 prospect in baseball in the Baseball America preseason list. Because if you look at the 9 players ahead of Samuel Basallo, starting with Jackson Holliday, who should be in the big leagues long enough this year to get off that prospect list, there's really only 2 guys ahead of Basallo in the top 10 who have a good chance of still being considered a prospect this time next year. The first one is Dylan Cruz, the outfielder who was picked number 2 in the draft last year by the Nationals. And the other one is Ethan Salas, who's kind of like the other Samuel Basallo, an even younger catcher. I think he's 17 or 18 years old, who got up to Double-A with the Padres last year and is a special talent. So if Basallo can just outplay Cruz and Salas this year, which could happen, Samuel Basallo could be the number 1 prospect. Like, it's not out of the realm of possibility. And honestly, as long as he stays healthy and produces, Samuel Basallo will be at worst a top 5 prospect in baseball going into 2025. It's absurd what he's done and what the Orioles have done with him. Now, the rest of the list for the O's Coby Mayo jumps up to number 25 on the Baseball America list. Really cool to see that. Mayo with that huge power from the right side, plays third base and first base, but working on right field as well. He's going to be a piece at some point this year, I think, for the Orioles. Colton Cowser comes in at number 34, despite the struggles of the big leagues last year. Remember, it was a very, very small sample size for Colton Cowser. He's still got a lot of tools, good batting eye, solid power, good hit tool. Maybe not a everyday center fielder, but if he's in a corner outfield, can play it well and can play center for you. Got a good left-handed swing. He's still going to be a good player. Heston Kjerstad is up to number 41 on the Baseball America list. Showed a lot of power when he got to the big leagues last year. Him and Cowser will both be big league pieces. And then funny enough, Baseball America, I think, does something a little bit different with how they determine whether a guy is still a prospect. They still have DL Hall considered a prospect. So they've got DL Hall at number 93 on this list as well at the bottom of the top 100. Obviously, Hall is going to be on the big league Orioles team for this entire year, most likely as a high leverage reliever. He's going to come off this list because he'll graduate, but cool to see him, still on there, which gives the Orioles 6 players in the Baseball America top 100. Now, they also did a write-up about, the other players they considered, and Joey Ortiz was in the group they called players that just missed this top 100. So Ortiz was heavily considered to be in there. And they also have guys who just received votes, among the writers, among the people who contributed to this list, who are players who were brought up by someone. And there were a lot of others. Enrique Bradfield Jr., the Orioles' first-round pick out of Vanderbilt, the speedy center fielder from this year. Connor Norby, the second baseman in Norfolk, who seems to be blocked but has an incredible hit tool. Chase McDermott, right-handed pitcher with great stuff, who was incredible in AAA last year. Dylan Beavers, second-round pick out of Cal a couple years ago. Really interesting swing from the left side, but athletic player with a high ceiling. Seth Johnson, acquired in the Trey Mancini trade, had Tommy John surgery after the deal, finally came back to pitching in the minors late last year. He'll be a full go in 2024. And Cade Povich, the left-hander who struggled some in AAA but has great stuff and could be in the big leagues this year. You add up all those guys mentioned, that is 13 Orioles prospects that Baseball America at least mentioned in their write-up for the top 100. Yeah, the system still running strong, I'll say, at this point. And then Baseball Prospectus, which I'd probably rank Baseball America above BP on the prospect list that I look at, but still cool to see it. Of course, Jackson Holliday, number 1 over Baseball Prospectus. Samuel Basallo at number 13, still pretty respectable, although they are the high people on Coby Mayo. Baseball Prospectus has Coby Mayo as the number 15 ranked prospect in baseball, which is just incredible. They have Kjerstad and Cowser flipped. I think that's a really interesting conversation in the O system right now. BP with Kjerstad at 41, Cowser at 51. And then I don't think they consider DL Hall a prospect, but they do have a 6th Orioles prospect in there. And it's not Joey Ortiz. It is Enrique Bradfield Jr. Baseball Prospectus has him at number 82 in their top 100. Pretty interesting. I think people still want to see, how will the bat play in the higher levels of the minor leagues, and we'll get to see that. He's most likely, I would think, going to begin the year in AA Bowie this season, but it'll be really, really interested to see. And all this shows that the Orioles still have a stacked system. They still have arguably the top system in baseball. And what all this talent shows me, and the fact that, all these guys that are ranked are position players, you got too many position players. You got the players to swing a trade. Orioles, John Angelos, Mike Elias, Sig Mejdal, Yves Rosenbaum. It's time to make something happen. You got the prospects. Let's go do it. Whether or not they make something happen, the O's will take the field in 2024, coming off a division championship, 101 wins, and they'll have high expectations either way this season. And I don't think they've finalized the roster yet, but they have finalized their major league coaching staff. And there's not a lot of surprises, but we did finally learn who that assistant pitching coach is going to be and who the new names are going to be that are in the big league dugout. We'll talk about them to finish off the show coming up next. But first, this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast is also brought to you by FanDuel. Now, it's here. Divisional weekend of the NFL. Ravens and Texans. Hopefully Baltimore can get into the AFC Championship game. And there's still time to get in on the action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place a $5 bet. That's $150 in bonus bets, win or lose. The app is so easy to use, and there's so many different ways to bet, like live same-game parlays. You can find bets in the new Explore tab, and you can make a parlay in the Parlay Hub, and there's just so much more. So visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn and make your first bet a layup. with FanDuel, official partner of the NFL. So we're finishing off an Orioles news and notes episode here on a Friday to cap off the week on the pod. Of course, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe to the Locked On Orioles YouTube channel. If you're watching on YouTube, you can still see it. Again, I moved to the new place last week. The wall's kind of orange. It's really salmon, but I think on the video it looks more orange, so it's kind of fitting in with the decor that's about to go up. Hopefully by next week's podcast, we'll have something behind me, a little more Orioles background like I had at the previous place recording here on YouTube. But still like, comment, and subscribe, and also rate and review wherever you listen as well. We thank you so much for doing so. I wanted to talk a bit about the Orioles Major League coaching staff because it was officially announced earlier this week, and there weren't a lot of surprises, but wanted to talk about who some of the new faces are. Now, the big changes on the staff, and we knew about these changes, were Chris Holt is no longer the pitching coach. He had been that since 2021. The Orioles kind of moved him back to his initial role when he came into the system, which is the director of pitching, which basically means he's going to oversee all pitching throughout the system, minor and major leagues, but he'll get to bounce around between the big league team and all the minor league affiliates and kind of do a role that I think he's more suited for at this point. And the Orioles also did not bring back Darren Holmes. He was their assistant pitching coach. They parted ways with him. He actually got a new deal. He is now the Chicago Cubs bullpen coach. He got that job this offseason. And then the O's hired Drew French as their new pitching coach. That happened about a month ago. We talked about it on the podcast. French, who was the Braves bullpen coach for the last few years. But of course, the connection, he was a minor league pitching coach in the Astros system and a fast riser there when Chris Holt and Mike Elias and others were there in Houston, so they know Drew French very well. One of the big reasons why he was brought over for that job. But the big question was, who would be the Orioles' assistant pitching coach? They filled in the top job with French, but who would take over Darren Holmes' role? And we speculated the Orioles, they could make another outside hire, but we thought they made one outside hire with French. They'd probably make one inside hire and promote someone from the minor leagues. And a lot of us thought it would be Justin Ramsey, who's been the pitching coach at AAA Norfolk for the last few years, has moved up the system with all these pitchers, but instead it was a different name that I hadn't really considered as much. Mitch Plassmeyer is now the Orioles' new assistant pitching coach at the big league level. Now, Plassmeyer has been the Orioles minor league pitching coordinator since May of 2022, and he's basically been able to go around to all of the different levels and help out with all of the guys in the system. He spent 1 year as a college pitching coach. He was at Missouri in the SEC in 2022, and then basically as soon as the season ended, he was hired by the Orioles in May of that year and took that job, as was certainly a step up in a big league system. But before Missouri, he was one of these guys who was a pitching coach at one of these workout places. He was the director of pitching and kind of led the way at P3, which is essentially like Driveline, but it's located in Missouri. And he was there for 3 years from 2019 to 21 before getting that Missouri job. Before that, he pitched at 3 different colleges, pitched at Kansas State and Jefferson College, and finished his career at Bradley University at the D1 level. He's only 28 years old, and he is now the assistant pitching coach for the Major League Baltimore Orioles. Mitch Plassmeyer is 2 years older than me, and he is the assistant pitching coach for the O's. I mean, good for him. He's been a fast riser in this system, in baseball in general. Seems to be a good mind and a good guy to work with in the minor leagues. So excited for him that he is on this staff. And the other new addition to the Orioles big league staff is Grant Anders, who was added to the major league staff as a major league development coach who will be with the big league team this season. He's been with the Orioles since 2019, basically since Mike Elias took over. He's been an analyst at the big league level, at the minor league level, and has been with the Orioles for a while. He worked for the Royals and the Reds before that, and was also the director of player development at Radford from 2015 to 18 during his time in undergrad. Did not play on the baseball team, but was heavily involved with the team there, then got into minor league baseball and worked his way up to the major league level. And Anders also in his late 20s, like Plassmeyer. It is a young coaching staff, very similar to a young Orioles team. But the rest of the Orioles staff will stay the same. Matt Borg-Schulte and Ryan Fuller continue as the co-hitting coaches. Tony Mansolino coaching third base, Anthony Sanders at first, and Jose Hernandez, just a major league coach in there. Freddie Gonzalez continues as the bench coach for Brandon Hyde, who of course is back as the Orioles manager. Ryan Klimek continues as the pitching strategy coach. Cody Ashe continues as the offensive strategy coach. And Tim Cousins is out there still as the catching instructor and bullpen coach for the Orioles to round out their coaching staff for 2024. And looks like a good group. I'm excited and interesting to see how this French and Plassmeyer kind of very young combination as the pitching coaches can help out some of these Orioles arms in 2024. And hopefully, the group they'll be working with is not complete yet. Hopefully there is still a move to add some pitching to help out French and Plassmeyer in 2024. And hopefully that move happens next week and we could talk about it on the podcast. But either way, we'll be back next week with a pod returning to you on Monday. But until then, I'm Connor Newcomb, and this has been the Locked On Orioles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.